Hi everyone, good morning or good afternoon depending on where you're at. Welcome to the webinar. Today's webinar is titled Get a Complete View of Your Customers by Moving to Salesforce CRM, Cardinal Success Story. This is the first webinar in a series of financial services technology events. The webinar today is hosted by Salesforce Cloud Alliance partner Manta Systems, our partner Informatica Cloud, and our mutual Salesforce client and guest Emily Burt from Cardinal Capital Management. Just a few housekeeping items for today. The webinar session will be around 45 minutes long, and we will start the webinar with some quick introductions of participating companies. Then our guest, Emily, will tell Cardinal's story of their move to Salesforce. Next, we will have our senior financial services consultant, Travis, speak on Salesforce implementation, integration, and best practices. And to finish the session's informational section, we will have Darren from Informatica Cloud talk briefly on the Informatica Cloud integration tool. We will finish the webinar today with Q&A. Please note that if you have any questions, you can put them into the chat box on the right, and I will get to those at the end. On to the introductions. Manta Systems is a Cloud Alliance partner and specializes in handling the technology needs of financial services companies, especially in implementing and integrating Salesforce. We are headquartered in San Francisco with consultants around the United States and an offshore center in Delhi, India. Here are a few selected financial services customers, including our guest today, Cardinal. Now I'd like to introduce Cardinal Capital Management. Cardinal is an investment counsel and portfolio management company out of Canada with customers throughout North America. They have recently implemented Salesforce and integrated it with Advent APX. It is my pleasure to introduce Emily Burt, the VP of Marketing and Communications at Cardinal, but she is so much more than that. Emily is also the head of business development and the driver behind the recent move to Salesforce. Emily?
Thanks, Daniel. I'm happy to share our experience making the move to Salesforce with everyone today. I'll give you a little bit of a background on Cardinal. We're a portfolio management firm based in Winnipeg, and we work with both high net worth clients and institutions. We've been in the business for 20 years now, and we've seen specifically a lot of growth in the past 5 years. Our assets have doubled over this period, our sales team has grown, and I joined the firm about 4 years ago to lead the business development group and to basically focus on sales growth and marketing efforts for the firm. This is a quick summary of the challenges that we faced about a year ago when we started looking into coming up with a strategy for CRM at the firm. We, first of all, have to try to manage this growing sales team, and that's really under myself. We've got multiple sales channels. As I mentioned, we work with institutions. That covers pensions. We have sub-advisory relationships, and then we have direct clients as well as referred clients. So all these sales channels continue to be a challenge to deal with. We also opened a new sub-office in Calgary, so being about a 15-hour drive away from here, it's definitely a challenge to try to manage a group. And we actually wanted to open other sales offices. This one went very well, so we're considering repeating that over the next little while. But as you can imagine, it's difficult to manage a team of 10 salespeople without any centralized reporting, which is really what we were lacking. So a CRM system was way overdue. Also, tracking of our sales team's meetings was totally manual process. It lacked any way to verify activity. Reports sometimes took months to come in from some of my salespeople. It made it very difficult for us to view trends in a timely manner to take any kind of action. Our pipeline reporting as well was really ad hoc. It was generally submitted to management on a yearly basis when we were setting our projections. But there was no regular follow-up. It was very difficult to determine success on a monthly or even quarterly basis. And some of these pipelines that are created in Excel, put in people's notebooks. Very difficult for us to identify where leads were left off if we had sales turnover within the group. So that was becoming a problem as well. The third thing would really be just remote access that's needed for a sales team that is on the road a lot. We've got clients all across Canada, throughout the United States, and we were basically phoning into the office whenever we needed information on client accounts, requesting any kind of data on their portfolios. Just some of the basics would have been great for us to have at our fingertips, as well as the ability to track the meetings and the conversations that we're having while we're on the road. There was no centralized place to keep these records. Overall, we just lacked a 360-degree view of our clients. Our portfolio management system was great. At this point, we were already using Advent APX. It allowed the operations team to work well, the investment team to work well, but the sales team just didn't have something that worked for us. We needed more structure to our processes, and we needed the ability to access information when we needed it. Next slide, please. So this is a summary of what my goals and our firm's objectives were when we started to look at Salesforce. First of all was just visibility. As I mentioned, we needed accountability for our salespeople. Second would be linking our pipeline with more accurate forecasting. This was something that not only the management team needed, but our board was looking for. Third, this ability to have remote access for our sales team was just so necessary. We knew that it would increase communication channels between our groups. By having better records, we just knew that it would create a more seamless client experience too. Better sales productivity is always something that firms are looking for. We also wanted to try to limit future hiring until the current team that we have was ultra productive. And as I mentioned, customer experience, having a seamless client experience was really something that we wanted to try to strive for, making sure that we never dropped client requests, never dropped client conversations, and always followed up on leads. Next slide, please. So here we are today. Cardinal has officially launched Salesforce. We worked with Mansa over the past year, and we've launched Salesforce now for a team of 14 individuals. We've also been able to fully integrate Salesforce with Advent APX, and this was a top priority for me, and something that from day one I wasn't even sure was possible, but it certainly is, and it certainly has gone well. We've used Informatica Cloud to do this integration, and things are working quite seamlessly. Right now, we have the whole team using Salesforce in the office on the web, as well as on our mobile phones. I use it on my iPad. We're able to quickly refer to conversations, our meeting notes, as well as client account information when we're out of the office. And all of our sales team's reporting now comes from one central place where users can even customize their reports to suit themselves. Overall, I'd say the flexibility we've had, we now have in Salesforce, allows us to create any report we can dream up. Any user can build whatever report they want, which is fantastic. Now that we've started to gather data and information for prospective clients, we've actually seen that this has sped up the process for opening new client accounts. It cuts down on errors as well. I'd say we probably have 2 days cut down on the time to open up new accounts. And we just have better records kept and better communication between the teams during the new account process. Productivity is definitely also up. We've seen increased productivity for every sales team member. We're better able to provide one another with backup support when someone is away, now that we can access the latest conversation that my colleague had with a client that phoned. Now if they're on the road, we can provide seamless backup support. We've also seen a decrease in leads being dropped. There's a decrease in time to complete a sale. and an increase in sales. Better visibility has also meant greater accountability for the team members. And as scary as it might have seemed to them right up front when we started talking about this, we've actually seen that it's meant more drive from each team member to build and have greater success with their pipelines overall. So to sum it up, that's Cardinal's experience. We very much look forward to working with Salesforce more and more in our daily routine.
Thank you, Emily. We appreciate you sharing your experiences with us, and we look forward to watching your company continue to grow and continue to grow with Salesforce. Now, I'd like to introduce Travis Grimm, our senior consultant and the PM of Cardinal's move to Salesforce. Travis?
Thanks, Daniel. Today we'll be walking through what's involved with a Salesforce implementation and integration project. We'll talk about briefly about some specifics for Cardinal Management, and then we'll talk about some best practices related to the implementation, integration, and deployment for a Salesforce project. So let's start with implementation. So implementation begins, the process begins with requirements gathering. So making sure that we look at the data and the data structure of what needs to be captured within Salesforce, what the reporting needs are, what the security and user needs are, what does the user interface need to look like for each particular record type, etc. Will there be any customer partner portals available off of the Salesforce data? What are the business processes going to be involved? And specifically, what's the project scope? What are we going to try and implement in a phase one? What might be, what are we going to potentially hold off for other phases, etc. Once we've gone through the requirement gathering process, we'll document all that together into a final specification and get sign-off from the customer. Once we get that sign-off on what we're going to be building for this implementation, we hand that off to our development team, and we work closely with the development team to make sure that things get configured and put together the right way. Once the development phase is completed, we go into testing. We do a heavy round of internal unit and QA testing on the system to make sure that it's built to specifications. Then we come back and get the client involved to do user acceptance testing. During that process, any updates that need to be made based on changing business requirements, etc., for what's included get captured. Once we have it to a stable final state, we get final sign-off from the customer, and then we go into deployment, which includes putting all that configuration in place in the client's production environment, initializing any data from any third-party or other CRM systems, and then going live with the platform, including user training and support. Next slide. Thank you. Included in implementation, sometimes implementations are only on the Salesforce side. However, as Cardinal did, we needed to integrate with a third-party system, in this case their portfolio management system, Admin APX. So as we go through an integration, the first thing that we go through in an integration is making data decisions. What are the key data that needs to live on each platform? Which direction does it need to move? Where is that data going to originate? And what is the timing of how that data flows, and what are the processes involved to make sure that things move in the right direction, we don't end up with duplication, we don't end up with overwrites of data and conflicting data between the systems. Once we get through that data decision process, we complete data mapping and transformations. So what data goes where from which system, what changes need to be made to that data to support the needs of that environment, so what transformations do we need to make sure that data is viewed in the proper way in each environment. Once we have all that mapping completed, we build out the interfaces on Informatica Cloud, and then do all the testing. So we make sure that data is flowing the way that it's supposed to. Are we getting the data on the other side? Is the data coming into Salesforce the way it's supposed to? Is it setting up the accounts right, clients right, contacts right, etc.? Is it updating the data properly? And are we pushing data back downstream to make that feasible for the customer? Once the testing is completed, we get sign-off. and then we deploy that. We deploy that into the production environment and go live with the integration. Next slide, please. We'll go over a quick overview of Cardinal's interface using Informatica Cloud. So the first slide shows data that's flowing from their Advent APX instance into their Salesforce instance. On a daily basis, we bring in households, clients, contacts, and portfolios, including portfolio data such as cash values, total market values, and realized gain-loss data. We also bring in activity data from Advent APX twice per day. As that data moves, the data is scheduled and scripted on Advent APX. That data is exported onto Cardinal Secure File Server, where it is then pulled in using Informatica into Cardinal Salesforce instance. Next slide, please. In addition, we're pulling data back from Salesforce into APX for data that originates there. On a daily basis, we're pulling in new client and contact data and pulling in new activities that need to be shared with Advent. And that happens on every 2 hours. Similar to what we had before, we have Informatica accesses Salesforce, pulls the data that we need to pull for the interface from Salesforce into Cardinal Secure Server, which is then scheduled and scripted to import into Advent APX. Next slide, please. So now we want to talk about some best practices when it comes to an implementation, integration, and deployment. So in the implementation phase, some of the best practices that we've seen is first, making sure that that the customer assigns knowledgeable key personnel for the requirements gathering, for the testing, and for the deployment. Making sure that the right folks that understand business processes across the board, understand the data, etc., are involved in the process, and the key stakeholders are involved to make sure that everything's getting covered. Second, make sure that the assigned staff that are on this have the time needed to contribute meaningfully to the project. So there is a time commitment related to these projects, as I'm sure everyone's aware, and making sure that those staff have the time available to meet those commitments will help make the project very successful. Third, a clear understanding of current business processes that are going to be involved with the implementation, making sure that every touch point, whether that touch point is going to be moved from somewhere else into Salesforce, or if Salesforce is going to create a touch point for processes outside of Salesforce that impact non-Salesforce users in your organization. Fourth, making sure that all of the business units or departments within your organization have a voice in the process that are going to be involved. So if there's a touch point or something's going to change in a process, even if it impacts someone, even if it's a non-Salesforce user, you want to make sure that they're involved and that they have input into the process so that they make sure, one, that they know what's coming, and two, that they're willing to support that process in the new world. Finally, in any implementation, being willing to limit the scope and use a phased approach. So making sure that to be successful, we don't want to try and implement every single possible scenario about how we may want to use it in the first phase. Limiting that down to what you're going to support from one department or one business unit, getting that implemented, getting it successful, and then building on that success and bringing in other business units or departments into the process will help make sure that it's a lot more successful. Next slide, please. Next, we have integration. So with the integration, first, make sure that the key data is understood what needs to be involved in each side for each system that's going to be included. And that goes hand in hand with the second item. Don't overload the data on either side. You want to make sure that we're not basically replicating all the data from one system to the other system across the board. We only want to bring in data that makes sense. So for instance, as we noticed within Cardinal's implementation, on the portfolio side, we bring in portfolio descriptive data as well as total market values, year-to-date realized gain loss and total cash values available. We aren't bringing in every single position. We aren't bringing every single asset name and value because for them, the key is making sure that they know how much each portfolio is worth, and that's all rolled up at a customer and a household level. In other implementations, that may change, but we want to make sure that the Salesforce user has the data they need to deal with 80 to 90% of the questions that come up. And then from there, we can rely on other third-party systems for more detailed support as needed. Third, we want to try and make sure that we use integration to gain efficiency and scale. This a very important point here, worked with Cardinal Capital, in that we wanted to make sure that data flowed between the systems and didn't have to be re-entered or re-keyed along the line, or as little as possible. One of the ways that we did that is that as sales users in Salesforce are updating prospect data, once that prospect becomes a client, we then key that data to flow downstream into Advent APX and auto-populate. When that data auto-populates, it keeps their back-office administration personnel from having to re-key all that data into the system, which then improves data quality and frees them up for more important tasks. Lastly, we want to assign personnel that know the data and the processes. So in any implementation, we want to make sure that the people that are involved in the integration portion of the project understand the data that's on the third-party system, understand how it works, where it goes, and what processes are impacted by that. So we make sure that we don't overlook impacts that might happen that could damage someone's process downstream. Next slide, please. Lastly, we'll talk about deployment and adoption. So the first key component in making sure that you have a successful deployment and successful adoption in your organization is making sure that the management team has buy-in to Salesforce value in the enterprise, and that they reiterate that across the board through the organization. Without that support, you end up getting people who don't want to buy in. They want to do things the way that they've been doing them, and you have a hard time getting people to use it and to get the value out of it that you need. Secondarily, you want to make sure that you provide adequate support and training for all personnel. So that includes initial training, any follow-up training, and then a process by which users can ask questions, get help, etc. Whether that's utilizing our services to assist with that, or, as we'll talk a little bit further down, making sure that the primary administrator for Salesforce has the ability to help and support those questions as well. Third, making usage mandatory and following up and coaching any stragglers within the organization. If one person is allowed to bypass the process, everyone else will think that it's okay to bypass it, and you'll have issues with getting people to put the data in where you want it, which impacts your ability to report on things like pipeline, customers, sales, etc. So staying on top of that, making sure everybody's using it, and making sure that anybody who is a straggler gets up to date, gets the training that they need, and is held accountable for their part of the Salesforce process. Finally, assigning a product champion and giving them autonomy. Usually this person in the organization is the primary administrator, and making sure that that person has the adequate training and support that's needed, and the autonomy to help people with issues, to make changes as necessary, to support business processes, etc. And that would be the end of my portion. Thanks, Daniel.
Moving on to the Q&A. We had a couple of interesting questions rolling in here that I wanted to be able to answer for you guys. One of the questions I saw right away, which looks like it's particularly for Emily, is what can Cardinal do differently with Salesforce.com that they can't do with their old CRM? Emily, can you answer this?
Yes, of course. Actually, we didn't have a CRM. So for us, I think the big issue is getting people to buy into using a CRM. You know, it's the classic change management issue, because we were going from no CRM to basically the best one out there. That was the challenge that we were faced, and it's a matter of getting each salesperson to change their routine, start loading in pipelines, start loading in data on all of their prospects. That for us was been and continues to be sort of the biggest issue, getting everyone to use it and love it.
So now we have questions rolling in about the expected cost of an integration. So Travis, can you handle how much might a typical integration cost? Travis, I can't hear you. Maybe you're muted.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Depending on the complexity of the project, you know, if there's very little customization that needs to be done and the integrations are fairly simple, it can be a pretty quick project and can be, you know, the cost can be fairly low depending on the implementation. Up to, if it's a very complex with a lot of integration points, it could be a lot more expensive. I think that, you know, it can range anywhere from, you know, a few $1,000s, depending if it's a very simple project, to, you know, quite a lot more depending on the complexity and depending on the needs of the customer. So I think that, you know, in any given instance, we need to sit down and look at the needs of the customer and come up with what makes sense based on what they need as well as what their budgetary constraints are.
So we have a question coming in particular asking, what Salesforce.com edition is Cardinal using? Travis?
Cardinal's using Salesforce Enterprise Edition, and we also utilized the Salesforce for Wealth Management from the App Exchange as a starting point for the customizations that were necessary to support their implementation.
Okay, great. If you guys have any more questions, feel free to put them in. In the meantime, I did want to roll in and show you guys that we do have a special offer for you guys that are attending. Mansa Systems is offering a free consultation and a detailed assessment and approach document. This is going to be a little bit more of an executive level assessment document than you might normally get in a consultation. Also, Informatica Cloud is offering a 10% discount on the integration tool before